Okay, so what's up, everybody? Recording a podcast episode for the prequels, as I'm sure you saw in the title. Let's just go ahead and get into it. Just for a little reference, I'm doing this all in one go, just so you have an understanding of how this was recorded. The reason is finals came along. There was just kind of a lack of interest in recording with the Star Wars movies. And that's not on any of my hosts or anything like that. I don't know. Star Wars used to be like a very huge thing to me, and I just think at this point there's just less of that. And I'll sort of get into that a little bit as we're going on with this. But we're doing the prequels first. I just wanted to throw out there I'm doing it all in one go right before I'm seeing The Rise of Skywalker, the last of this saga, if you will, until they make 3 more, which is fine. But anyway, first one's up is The Phantom Menace. So when I rewatch these, The Phantom Menace is the one that probably bothered me the most. And the problem for me is The Phantom Menace feels unnecessary, and what I mean by that is anything it sets up, anything, any goals it goes out to do in the first movie, I don't feel like those really matter for 2 and 3, or even 4, 5, and 6. But just in the trilogy that they're in, I feel like they don't really affect any of the other movies. And there's some key things. This isn't. Just to be clear, I like all of these movies. I think they all have their flaws. Star Wars isn't the most logical franchise in the world. So it's fine. Like, if you're sitting here like, but I love The Phantom Menace, that's valid. Like, even if you like Solo the best, I completely understand that. But, that my biggest thing is if I were doing the prequels, don't show Anakin as a kid. Now, an interesting thing happened because I've always held to that. When I got a little bit older, I was like, that was a mistake doing 8-year-old Anakin instead of starting him out when he was 15, like he is in Attack of the Clones. But for whatever reason on this watch, it didn't matter as much, just a little bit. And I think it was just a little bit of acceptance of that arc and being like, no, this is what George Lucas chose. So, let's go along for his ride. And I think he really made a movie that a child would get lost in, because this is the movie I got lost in when I was young. So in that regard, it is successful. Like, I really do like the pod racing bit, especially this watch. For whatever reason, I thought it was even better than before. I don't know, it just has a good score paired with it. It's a nice set piece in this film to sort of switch from a lull that was going on. I think this one is probably, it might be number 3, but this one's pretty action heavy in a good way. But the biggest thing for me is there's no purpose. Qui-Gon dies, but I feel like that doesn't actually have implications on the next film. Of course, you get Obi-Wan, teaching Anakin. That is a consequence of Qui-Gon dying. But I feel like you don't get any sort of struggle with Obi-Wan. You don't get the lasting effects of that. And I think part of that is the mistake of killing Darth Maul. So I'll get into this more in episode 2. But it makes no sense to me that they killed off Maul, because if he had escaped or something, then you have a nemesis for Obi-Wan to sort of feed into the hate of, and almost act as a, oh, hey, Anakin, don't do what I did. Don't fall into that hate, that I think could have worked really well, but it didn't, nothing ever came from it. And from my understanding, I've seen up until that episode, stopped watching after that. But from my understanding, Darth Maul comes back in the Clone Wars series, even Rebels as well. And there's some interesting stuff that they do with the character of Obi-Wan as well. And, it's just those things that everybody else that's telling the story is like, oh yeah, clearly this was the decision to make because yeah, that makes the most sense progression wise. You care about Obi-Wan's struggle because we knew Qui-Gon in the first one. You know, it works, and it seems like a very simple fix that wasn't made. If we're talking other small negatives, I'm less anti Jar Jar as I used to be. I don't know what's happened. I think, you know, it's just one of those things that began to be cooler to hate. And just as things were going on, it was like, oh wait, I mean, this character is dumb, but not the worst character to ever be put on screen. I think Ewan McGregor, for me, is the one that stands out the most here. He gives a really solid performance. I don't think anyone's that stellar in terms of acting, just because they're not being, you know, you're not ever being asked that much in acting from Star Wars. But I think Ewan gives a really solid performance. I think Liam Neeson is solid. He's obviously given a little bit more than Ewan McGregor, but you know, he sort of embodies this mentor character in Qui-Gon, which okay, the midi-chlorians is a big, I don't even know why I forgot that part. That's a big miss too, because you could have such interesting lessons that Luke got in the original trilogy with Qui-Gon. He can be the Luke character. And another thing, if we're, I don't know, I don't want this to become me rewriting the prequels on here, but don't include Yoda in the movies. Just because that, if someone watched 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, and 6, that, you know, everybody's beaten this to the death. You're not going to get the surprise anymore with Yoda. So, I don't know. It's just one of those interesting things where it's like, George Lucas, what did you set out to do with the prequels? And a lot of people throw out there like, oh, well, he needed money. And I don't know, maybe that's the case, but George Lucas could literally make anything if he needed to make money. So I don't think that's it. I just want to I think it would be interesting to get into Lucas's headspace while he was making these movies. And I probably should go back and watch some of the audio commentaries just to sort of understand, oh, hey, here's where he was at while he was making this film. I think the score is absolutely tremendous. I mean, everybody's still talking about Duel of Fates. It's a fantastic piece. It's lots of fun. Iconic, of course. And there's just a really talented team on the CGI department. I know that's a little bit of discussion there, because obviously there's more CGI here, and obviously some of it does not look as good. However, like, I don't know. It's just that they're innovating. You know, it was Lucas pushing that technology, and I think in a lot of places you won't even notice that there's that much CGI in a scene. Some of it is very obvious, of course. You know, that's always going to be the case when you got the Gungans versus the droids. Like, yeah, no, that scene's very heavy CGI, and I think in doing that, you create something really interesting that can be built upon later. In that George Lucas can now create a huge fight in Army. You know, when you did it before, back in the original trilogy days, you couldn't stage that fight with the Gungans versus the droids. And I'm not saying that's the best fight, you know, but it's still like an interesting one. I don't know. I don't think the effects are the worst thing ever. Obviously, it's a little bit too far in the CGI department, where practical effects could still be used effectively in a lot of scenes. Just where CGI is a little bit unnecessary. But again, George Lucas is an experimenter, so I sort of get it. All right, so now we're moving on to Attack of the Clones. And just for like a little bit of background, Attack of the Clones used to be my least favorite out of all the Star Wars movies, when there were only 6. And most of that is just because it feels kind of lifeless and a little lacking in the purpose department. However, that sort of changed for me. Just because, so the biggest thing for me is if I was doing a trilogy with sort of looking at what Lucas mapped out, and if that was presented to me and it was like, oh, hey, make some edits here, I would probably kick out Phantom Menace just entirely. I think there's maybe one or two scenes you could put in, but even so, it has some parts that really, really need to be worked on. And I'd actually infuse Qui-Gon into Attack of the Clones, and then I would probably still keep it the same, except for that final battle. Instead of Padme being there, it would be not Mace Windu. It would be Qui-Gon Jinn, and maybe even at the final battle, you can have Qui-Gon Jinn there, and instead of Mace or God, why am I going back to Mace Windu again? Instead of Count Dooku being there, you can use Darth Maul, and you can have Darth Maul against these three Jedis. And telling Anakin, maybe even put Anakin against someone else. There's a lot of really good stuff in here that I think I overlooked when I was saying it's the worst one. I think Ewan McGregor's lots of fun. Him going on a bunch of space missions, I could watch. That's a very watchable little part of it. Even when he goes in that CGI lunchroom and it doesn't look the best. It's still like there's something fun, there's something light and bouncy about Obi-Wan. And I think part of the mistake here was that there was never a decision of or at least for me, not this isn't saying what George Lucas chose to do was wrong. But for me, I think what could have benefited is if you focus or you make the main character Obi-Wan, just outright. And I think they switch back and forth between Obi-Wan and Anakin. And you can have Anakin moments, I'm just saying sort of deplete those. I actually do sort of like some of the love scenes, just because I think there's a little bit of attachment there that makes you care about these characters a little bit for episode 3. It's not as mind-numbing as it used to be. Even the sand line, that's sort of laughable. I was like, okay, yeah, you said it. It was a little weird, a little bit, but I'm still okay with this for whatever reason. There's a lot to build on here. That's good, and that's worthy to be watched. And I think a lot of people forget that. I think the first action scene, while it isn't the smartest and most well thought out thing, with the Chancellor's gonna get someone else to get someone else to get someone else to kill Padme. And it's like, wait, y'all could just kill Padme. Anyway, while that isn't as well thought out, it's still an awesome set piece, in my opinion, because it brings you to the city. It brings you throughout all these towns. It has Anakin and Obi-Wan actually doing stuff, becoming buds. And that's another thing that's lacking for me in these, is you really... I really don't buy into the Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker relationship. And there's other things, ancillary things, that show their relationship so much better. And I think if you use those as a companion piece, it helps strengthen these two later films, a whole lot more. I'm talking about Attack of the Clones, the series, that Genndy Tartakovsky, that might be wrong name, but he did the series. It's the director of Samurai Jack, and it is incredible. The animation's awesome. The story progression's great. It actually shows Anakin sort of teetering on that dark side in a vivid presentation that's absolutely beautiful. There's some good stuff here about Anakin turning. Obviously, going to his mom, that hurts a lot. And I actually do think that might be the best scene here. I know that sounds odd, but you actually see some of the progression of that character. You see the darkness within him growing. But I don't know. There could have been just a little bit more here. And then I would have been like, oh, yeah. I definitely see what they're going for, where they're going with episode 3. But yeah, I might slot this one higher than Phantom Menace just because I think it's more necessary. Because you have some of those moments with Obi-Wan and Anakin, and they do feel, once you've just sort of immersed yourself in the Star Wars world, and I'll harp on this over and over, so people will probably get tired of me saying this, and you're probably going to get tired of me talking about Star Wars for however long, all 9 of these are going to be, but more Star Wars is a good thing. Even if mistakes are made, even if things go bad, it really doesn't matter. It's just more of this sci-fi epic fun thing that everyone can enjoy at the end of the day. So I can't hate on any of these movies. They're fun. Like they're goofy, they're silly. Count Dooku, Jango Fett are fun in little bursts. I think you could maybe, I don't know. This is an interesting thing because I like Duel of Fates. I like that battle. But I like Count Dooku. Count Dooku's cool. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Because Darth Maul doesn't really talk. And he doesn't really have a character. And I just, like... I think I underestimated how sassy the Star Wars movies was. And Count Dooku's full of sass. And he's... I don't know. He's just an interesting character. Like, I don't know how to explain it. The only thing that bothers me about the Count Dooku stuff is... They go crazy and they're like, forget the rule of two. He's got his side apprentice. He's got Grievous. He got all this stuff. I'm not saying Count Dooku's got to abide by anything. I just mean, I don't know. There's stuff that could be maybe tweaked a little bit for that. I'm mostly saying that because I'd just get rid of Grievous altogether probably. More than likely just because what... I don't know. What does he do? Like, he doesn't really scare anyone. He doesn't really move the story too much. Just this Grievous is an interesting villain because if you presented him to me, I'd be like, oh yeah, like guy with 4 lightsabers, neat. And maybe I would even like before that because like, oh hey, it's guy with 4 lightsabers. Why wouldn't I? But he just has no character. He's just shoehorned into episode 3. Even if you watch Clone Wars, the short little mini series, that even if you pair with that, you're still not getting everything because it's just not. It's not a well thought out character. Oh man, I think Ventress is even better, and Ventress gets way more progression. In that little miniseries that we were talking about. Watch that miniseries. It's free on YouTube. Like, it's... I don't know. I guess I should mention that real quick. It's amazing. It's lots of fun. Everyone should give it a watch. I think it's... I don't even know. It's only like 2 hours, if that. It's got a lot of really interesting stuff. The style's fantastic. There's one fight in particular that is just... Oh, scrumptious. You just eat it up. And I'm trying to think. You get more Grievous too. In terms of like Clone Wars was lots of fun. Again, it goes back to the point I was saying because more Star Wars is a good thing. And even okay, so Rebels is in between. So maybe I should save that. But even Rebels has some fun things. Even if they do the silly like, oh hey, Jedis can fly with their lightsabers now. Which is inherently ridiculous. Like, I don't know who we're kidding there. But, Star Wars is goofy. It's okay. That's fine. But yeah, no, that's probably all I'm going to talk about with Attack of the Clones. Not as bad as I thought. Could be way worse. A little bit more important than Phantom Menace. I actually think Hayden Christensen is a little bit fun. He's a little believable. And Mace Windu gets a little bit of stuff. Yoda, again, just to agree with my first point, Yoda shouldn't be doing stuff. That's just how it works. He should be off, and on his own planet, being a hermit. And then you get the surprise in episode 5. And then maybe we could get a Yoda miniseries. And I don't know. That would be something, I guess. Anyway, on to episode 3. So this one's regarded as the best. Oh boy, I think all the prequels are very messy. I think 2 and 3. Obviously, I just said this, but 2 and 3 I feel are a little bit necessary. They feel like there's a purpose there. Episode 3 feels very rushed, and it's 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I feel like it could have been a 4-hour movie with all the things they were trying to do. Because one of the things, obviously, here is we want to see Darth Vader start turning. We want to see signs of Darth Vader from Anakin. We don't want to, immediately. And you sort of get that at the start. And then you don't get a little bit, like you don't get too much for a while. And I think Hayden Christensen, I know people like to just sort of down him a little bit, but I actually think he's a decent actor in here. At the end of the day, if you have both Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman giving bad line delivery, then that might be, part of the director and what they're being asked of. And there is, I don't know, there's choices made here. I think the Emperor stuff is kind of ridiculous to me, just with how it's paced. I really love the story time that we get with Anakin and Palpatine, but the tale of Darth Plagueis could be put somewhere else in the story, and it could be way more impactful. Maybe if it was before he was about to go on this big mission or anything like that, it just would have more weight and gravitas to it. And I think him, 3 Jedi being like, we know about Palpatine, we're gonna go get him, and then Anakin immediately flipping, not the best. I like some of the ideas of this stuff, but at the end of the day, when you're trying to squeeze so much into 2 hours and 20 minutes, there's a lot left to be put on the table. And I think the Jedi's being killed is cool. Order 66 is actually lots of fun. Again, no Yoda, please. Especially no Yoda with Chewbacca. Because, what? Why? Like, I remember watching that when I was 10. And I was just like, this is the best ever. Because it was Yoda and Chewbacca. So again, if George Lucas is making these movies for kids, by all means a pass. Like, he did it. You goofed me into thinking this was one of the best movies ever when I was younger. Just because people did legitimately think this was the end of Star Wars. And I think there was a lot of goodwill for it because of that. And I do think, I for sure think this is the best of the prequels. However, I think the most difficult thing for me is this movie is clearly the one I would break into 2. And obviously I mentioned this movie probably could be 4 hours. And that's because, that might be influenced by, that's what I would do. It might be a little bit influenced by that. So what I would try to do is you have that fight on Mustafar, but you can put that in the second movie. So if we're moving Attack of the Clones to number 1, then you have Revenge of the Sith in the number 2 spot. And you have Anakin fight Obi-Wan, and you have this big fight. And you can even make it something dumb, like Anakin thinking that Obi-Wan's been talking to Padme, and maybe it's because Obi-Wan is just trying to help them out in their situation. I don't know. I love those tales of jealousy fueling rage, and I think that could be a really interesting thing that would make, when Obi-Wan says in episode 4, and he's like, oh yes, that's an old friend of mine, we fought in the Clone Wars. Again, I forgot to mention this in episode 2. The Clone Wars is nothing. It's nothing at all. And that bothers me a little bit, because just what they do in Battlefront makes it seem so much more important than it is here. But when you have Obi-Wan say that scene, and you looking back, and a couple people have done the edits, I don't feel as much as I should. That scene should be so impactful when he's saying, you were a brother, Anakin, like you were my brother, Anakin. And the thing is, that's a well-written scene, but what's leading up to that isn't as good. It isn't at the level it needs to be to make that so impactful. So what you could have is obviously you'd need to rework a couple things, but what I would do is as soon as Obi-Wan says that line, he leaves. And then he's rescued by Palpatine and the droids that come pick him up. And then he's turned into Darth Vader. But you don't turn him into Darth Vader immediately. You put him in a weird space doohickey that's like keeping him on life support, and not immediately to build this weird Darth Vader thing. And he looks completely disfigured. All of these things. And then in episode 3, you can do some really interesting things. In my mock episode 3, I guess, where Obi-Wan is trying to figure out who this new Sith for Palpatine is, and he secretly knows it's Anakin, and he doesn't want to confront him because he left him. He's the one that killed them, and Anakin feels that he's the reason he's like this. Obi-Wan feels a little bit of guilt that he's like this, of course. And you can have a little bit of that confrontation. You could even have, see, this is where little sneaky thing. This is where I'd have Obi-Wan visit Yoda. And you don't mention Yoda in the first 2 episodes, so it makes for a really interesting, oh, he's with Yoda and he's learning more about the Jedi ways. I just feel like that would be way more powerful than Yoda doing backflips, which is fine, I guess. But it's not exactly what, I picture. And I actually love playing Yoda on Battlefront just because he's so little, you can't really shoot him. And he can do those backflips, and it's really cool. But just for this trilogy, yeah, it's a no for me. I actually, if we're talking things I like more, so that way it doesn't sound like I'm too negative, I do sort of like Grievous, in that I like how it looks. Like, it's a really fun fight, and you pair Obi-Wan against him, so I enjoy it because Ewan McGregor's a treasure. I can't wait for him to return to the role of Obi-Wan. He really has deserved it for some time. And there's just, I think they still get the action right. It's just the plot is not there. It doesn't click as much. Not everything's working at 100% like they are in the original trilogy. And part of that is just because, hey man, when you get lightning in a bottle, sometimes it can be hard to do it twice. And sometimes you want to try new things and just put yourself out there, and sort of just, I don't know, make a Star Wars movie. You're the guy that created Star Wars. So you're allowed to do what you want. But yeah, Anakin killing those younglings very quickly, it's a no for me. That's a big no. But you could have him do it in the 3rd movie when he's like full Jedi. I don't know. Just when he's like, Master Skywalker, where will we go? And he's slashing through them. And I'm like, oh God. I don't know. I don't know if I have other things to talk about the prequels. It was a fun watch for all these 3. I think they actually they have the same energy to each other. So I think all the prequels, or all the trilogies, don't really match any of the other trilogies. And we'll talk about that with the original trilogy and the new trilogy, even though I haven't seen The Rise of Skywalker. But these fit together. These 3 fit together. I don't think they fit that well with, the original trilogy, but the prequel trilogy, they have their place. They bounce off one another. And that's going to be me talking about the prequel trilogy. And we went for about 30 minutes. So, if you enjoyed this, check out other podcasts. I'm not talking only in the other ones. We have other hosts that are on. For whatever reason, people just weren't as interested in Star Wars. So here I am talking about it by myself. But thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.